I'm Jacqueline Gelineau, and I'm joined here today with Ken Robertson.
My spear name is Squilux, meaning the bear cubs, as I share this name with my twin brother.
And he's the Liberal candidate for the Kamloops-Shuswap-Central Rockies riding. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
What are some of the largest issues that you've identified throughout this campaign that's facing your constituents specifically?
Yeah, so one, of course, is affordability. The other two that I'll mention is job security. Obviously, we have a softwood sector here that provides the best products in the world. And then third, of course, is healthcare. As we have an aging population, we need to ensure that they are accessing these critical healthcare. But the last point I'll give to you is also what is affecting us from day to day, which is Donald Trump and his unjustified tariffs.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, the resource extraction, lumber, is a really big part of your area. What would you do if elected to ensure that those industries continue to be prosperous while keeping in mind there's trade difficulty?
Yeah, well, one thing that we identified, because my father, who worked in a softwood lumber industry, tariffs aren't an old thing, but the new thing is that they're increased in the percentile of tariffs. But for the most part is that we want to be there for those in that sector to, when they're, for instance, a shutdown, that they can access their EI benefits more readily available. But for the most part, they chose that career. That's the career they want to be in. That's the one we want to keep them in. But for those short-term gaps, we identified that right away through Mark Carney and the vision that we try to understand, getting through this storm.
Mm-hmm. And if elected, how would you balance the needs of protecting the environment, being a steward of the land that you're on, while also ensuring that your community remains prosperous and economical?
Yeah, so first of all, we have a very comprehensive plan, when it comes to believing in climate change, and that this is probably one of the more historic levels of low of water in our lakes and rivers. But we need to protect our air, land, and water when it comes to this. But, we believe not just in the incremental, because we don't want to send a system shock to our small, medium, and big businesses. And even though Mark Carney and the Liberals took the consumer price index off of the table when it came to this, we still have those in place for those big emitters, because we know it is man-made. We're not denialists when it comes to the Conservative Party, for instance. We actually have a true plan to get us out of there. And there are certain things in our comprehensive plan that we are trying to not send that system shock to businesses and to people as well. So those are some of the things.
Mm-hmm. Now, affordability is a large issue across the region, specifically cost of homes. Can you talk about what people in your riding have experienced in terms of housing affordability, and then what you would advocate for and want to change?
Yeah, so we released one of our first planks is in regards to getting Canada back into the business of creating homes on federal land or in working with municipalities so that services aren't missing from sewage to water, obviously electricity. But for instance, for those first-time home buyers, up to $1 million, we're eliminating the GST as well. But we want to make also all Canadian-made product in these modular homes, but also recognizing that, for heating, for cooling as well. But we want someone to have a place called home. But in the next 10 years, we have an aggressive plan, for instance, for 500,000 homes. And that's where I become the advocate as your MP to make sure and ensure that these plans are implemented here at home.
So there, like we have had a Liberal government for 2 terms
Mm-hmm.
now, and people have seen that housing affordability has, just become a greater problem
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of folks, and people living in rural areas are very largely impacted by this.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly would be changing from the last 2 terms of the Liberal government to this term, and with yourself if you're elected?
Yeah, so under Mark Carney's vision, this is where it comes into play that hearing from constituents, first of all, I have an open door policy when it comes, if when elected, that we need to hear from no matter what political stripe you're from in regards to these concerns. And I would not be that voice. I'd be that sort of vessel to convey that voice to Ottawa to have these healthy debates, first of all, in caucus, but also debate with my counterparts in regards to this is more of not just a want, a need.
Mm-hmm.
So affordability, obviously, we want to cut, 1% in regards to middle class so that we can grow our middle class. Also, I talked about the consumer price index, for instance, eliminating that, lowering gas prices by 18 cents a liter, which is helps, getting food to market. It'll help building materials to market.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you'll see those kind of measures with
Mm-hmm.
Mark Carney's experience with the 2008 financial crisis, for instance. He understands that there are methods, and that's where and we are presenting that sort of real world experience. He has, a Rolodex of first name bases, in regards to world leaders. And Canada will take the lead when it comes to all these issues that you've already mentioned. So we go to the old alliances that we've had, but making new alliances as well so that we can bring new trade routes. For instance, in the Asia market, that's where a lot of our lumber does go to besides down south. And that's what we have to do is take that lead.
Mm-hmm. Um, in speaking a bit about resource extraction and lumber, there's also mining that goes on around
Mm-hmm.
the region. Things like pipelines have been
Mm-hmm.
contested.
Mm-hmm.
How would you balance the needs and desires of rural communities, the city, because you have both in your riding? How do you balance those two needs, and
Mm-hmm.
and your perhaps could you speak to your past experiences and where you grew up?
Yeah, well, for the most part, oil is going to be transported through this region no matter what to get them to open market, opposed to just one market where they set the price over there. So, in regards to the pipeline, for instance, you know, this is the safest method compared to rail or on our roads, which infrastructure wise, they are upgrading through the system right now. But for the most part, it's about getting it to that open market for a better price. And that's, creating more jobs in Alberta, but also a safer conduct to the world markets so that we actually get best bang for our buck.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, people do have to understand, even though I am Indigenous when it comes to this issue, there are other methods that they are going to be transporting it that are unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize that. There's also Indigenous partnerships that do want to buy the pipeline, for instance, as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have these sort of shared values and understanding of that the market is where we have to open it up for Canadian oil or gas, and that's the means of getting the best bang for our buck.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your Indigenous heritage. You've grown up in the region. What are some key issues impacting the Indigenous community in your riding that's not as commonly seen
Mm-hmm.
in the other communities in the area, and how do you balance the needs of everyone?
Yeah, so like many families, for instance, we have to access healthcare off reserve no matter what. It's mandated under the province, it's funded through the federal government, obviously. But for the most things, there's housing crisis where we're over housed, for instance, where there's not enough room. Those towards economic development in the region as well, but also climate change for sure. And we have to really understand of unceded territory, for instance, as well. And giving them a proper informed consent, as you see in like our environmental laws that are in place as well, because we need to hear from those voices from their leadership and the community in regards to how do we approach things and looking at more of not just nation to nation, but allies. And one of those things I don't hear about is that, you know, allies are meant to help each other, right? In these critical times, I think that's where we need to move in regards to, you know, acknowledging that they are the land and right and title holders of these territories without through not just here locally, but, you know, even parts of the East Coast, pockets in Ontario. So, I mean, this is just one issue locally, but it is abroad as well. Thanks.
You briefly touched on healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
What would you, because it's an issue, you know, in our riding here in Kelowna as well, all across, we're having emergency departments being shut down.
Mm-hmm.
People are having to travel far distances to access physicians. It disproportionately impacts First Nations communities.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly would you, with the Liberal government, be advocating for to change to improve access to healthcare?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned previously, we have to work with the provinces and territories when it comes to that. That's still their mandate. But of course, we'd hold their feet to the fire when it comes to actually, especially in a rural remote strategy. So, to be clear though, on our record, we were the first to sign a 10-year healthcare accord. With that, it stabilized our funding formula, but also made sure that we had a strategy so that people can, even though under the province, still at least have stable funding strategy. But more importantly is that I set up my own small business in regards to healthcare because I have two children on the spectrum. So I do take it very personally. 10 years ago when I did start this business, no one was talking about a national autism strategy. I have a nonverbal daughter. I want to leave this world better than I found it. So I started in regards to policy, for instance, and that bending those decision makers' arms. Now we have a national autism strategy. Received royal assent last year. It's in the engagement piece right now in regards to provinces and territories. Of course, that's still under their portfolio. But we have to ensure that children or individuals or seniors are not treated differently from one province to territory. And that's what I try to do is make effective change, but not only make it effective, but actually implement. Thanks.
Um, so you live in a beautiful and very diverse riding. Do you have a favorite part of your riding, a favorite area that you like to go?
Well, I was just at one of my favorites, which was Chase Falls. It's one of my favorite places to go to actually just reflect not just in nature, but how we are connected in a sense, right? You know, from the waterways to the animals to the forests. Um, I would always have to say though, is going back to, because my grandma always said, the further you go back in your territory, the things in nature will provide everything for you. So going towards, you know, Shquaquak Belt or Sun Peaks, for instance, is one of my favorite drives. Just the trails alone, the nature that you get to see there is exhilarating. And the reason why in the morning, that's the first tip of where the sun hits.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for
I
having me.
appreciate it.
Mhm.